Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, a guy who's accomplished an awful lot, and in many people's eyes has done a getting England out of the Euro Union, but now he's jobless because he was on a TV show and he spoke his mind in England. Nigel, welcome to the program. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm okay, but I have to say there's a sort of mass hysteria seems to be gripping mainstream media in both of our countries.
Well, ours has been taken over completely by the left. I mean, the uber left. It's not liberal. It's not even Democrat. It is democratic socialist and / crazy. It is. They are denying things now that we're seeing with our own eyes. So tell me about your situation yesterday. You were on a morning, I think you call them wake-up shows, and you, I don't know why you would agree to this, but you were with Piers Morgan.
Yes.
And he played his usual word games to make himself look good and make you look bad. What happened?
Well, I went on to, it's a program called Good Morning Britain. It's not the BBC. It's an independent commercial station. He does quite a big breakfast show there. He's done quite well with it. But I went on, and the reason I accepted to go on, Glenn, was because I was watching it the previous days, and they were all saying that, the protesters were absolutely justified in what they were doing, that Black Lives Matter was a really, really important movement. And we just had the toppling of the first statue in this country, a statue in Bristol in the west of England, and a mob, an angry mob, tore it down, stamped on it, and then threw it in the sea. And I thought it's about time somebody put up a counter-argument. So I finished up doing it live. It was myself, Piers, Susanna, who works with him, and two other guests. One, a Black Lives Matter activist, the other, a so-called academic. And it finished up in a four-way shouting match, four of them against me. And my argument was this: whilst we want to have equality of opportunity, we want to live in a society that is free and doesn't have horrible prejudice, the truth is that the three words Black Lives Matters may be innocuous, but the Black Lives Matters organization is an avowedly Marxist, anarchistic organization that wants to defund the police. It even wants to abolish the police. It wants to overthrow capitalism. It wants reparations for slavery in centuries gone by, and is a recipe for a really bitter division in society. So I wanted us to recognize who the organizers of these protests were. And everything I quoted to Piers and the other panelists, everything I quoted had come directly from the Black Lives Matters website. All right? These weren't my words. They were their words.
Right.
And they were kind of shouting at me that I was a liar, that I was out of touch. And then we moved on to the toppling of this statue. Now, the guy whose statue was toppled was part of, back in the 1600s, the slave trade. All right? And let's just remember, every country in those days was involved in it. I'm not condoning it, but that's history. That's the world we lived in. And I thought that if statues should be removed, they should be done by elected city councils, by elected city mayors, with the consent of the people. But that if you allow the mob to do it, and if the mob hysterically tear down screaming statues of people they disapprove of, that effectively is like the Taliban in Syria destroying ancient historical monuments. And I've been criticized for using the analogy, but I think it's a perfect analogy for what went on. And this led to, Piers making ridiculous comments like, would I want a statue of Hitler in London? And I mean, really low-grade stuff. But here's the key point. When YouGov polled nearly 5,000 people, and they asked them, did they approve of the way in which the statue in Bristol was removed, only 13%, 13% of people thought that was the right way to behave. So we've now got our biggest mainstream media programs openly supporting 13% of the population against 87% of the population. And so I don't regret for 1 minute making those arguments.
So, Nigel, it's funny that you said this because I know you called me yesterday to tell me this story, and I was looking into it, and I thought, oh, my gosh, that's exactly what I said yesterday. Here in America, I said, this reminds me of the Taliban in Afghanistan when they blew up the statues of Buddha. Those were World Heritage sites.
Yep.
And they just didn't like them, and they wanted them gone because they found them to be blasphemous. And the world yawned, and it was wrong then. I don't like statues of Civil War, heroes like William Bedford. I think that's his name, isn't it? Is it William Bedford, the guy who started the Klan? He was a horrible, awful human being. Yeah, Bedford Forrest. Thank you. Awful human being. I think his statues should be taken down if they are still up in the South. I think the schools, if any of them remain that were named after him, should be changed, but not in the middle of the night by an angry mob. And that's exactly what you were talking about. And you lost your job for it.
Yep, you and I thinking exactly the same way about this. If you want to revise, your civic architecture in your city, you do it democratically and peacefully. But the problem is, if you try and rewrite history, you find that it has some very unfortunate consequences. Because where do you end? I mean, if we're taking down statues of people involved with slavery, well, what about statues of politicians who opposed 100 years ago votes for women, for argument's sake? I mean, where do you end with this? You can't look back and judge history by the standards that we have today. And in 100 years' time, people will look back at us and think we were wrong with some of the things that we believed. Rewriting history, this is the kind of thing that Chairman Mao did. It's the kind of thing, as you and I have both agreed, that the Taliban did. It's the kind of thing that Hitler did when he burnt books that he found unacceptable. And is taking us in. They are very heavily funded, and we know the Soroses, the Steyers, these sort of people, they're very heavily funded. You've got a media that is now complicit with it. And in my country, mainstream leading politicians who are too scared to say a word against it. And what we're lacking, I think, right across Western society, in our churches, in politics, in media, even in the police, what we're lacking is the moral courage to stand up and say, this is wrong, and we won't put up with it. And I think, certainly in my country, ordinary Middle England people are now crying out for someone to say, enough.
So can you tell me why they are getting rid of, or they're defacing the church? Why is a group like Antifa, if that's who's doing it over there, why are these anti-fascists defacing the guy who ended fascism and Churchill?
Well, absolutely right. I mean, if it wasn't for Churchill, it would have been a Nazi Europe that probably would have lasted for about 50 years. So you're absolutely right. Nobody in the world did more to defeat fascism in a very brave fashion than Winston Churchill. But, of course, he was a big British patriot. He was a huge supporter of the British Empire. And part of this protest, it began, there was a catalyst with the horrible death of George Floyd. Some of the people protesting genuinely want injustices to be solved. But right behind this is cultural Marxism, all right? This is an attempt to destroy everything this country has ever stood for, everything this country has ever fought for, and to try and indoctrinate a young, university-educated group of people that they should be ashamed of their nation, ashamed of their country, that we should remove all symbols of our past, we should overthrow the free market and capitalism. And it is, frankly, this is the most dangerous thing we've seen since Churchill was our Prime Minister.